the idyllic villages that cling to our coastline.
This is absolutely breathtaking.
Known for their beauty.
To approach under sail like this is just thrilling.
And serenity.
It's a snapshot of a period that we've now lost.
Now destinations for our leisure. But once they played a vital role in the history of our island nation.
I can't believe this is actually happening.
Oh, wow. We've got a lunar landscape there.
It's incredibly important in terms of our heritage, and it's all happening here.
I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm fascinated by our coastal villages. And many, of course, are appreciated today for their beach holidays and their ice creams. But in the past, many had highly important roles in our trading nation.
I've come to Charlestown on the south coast of Cornwall, 15 miles from Truro. It's a picturesque Georgian village, and it was the vision of one man. We'll find out how he built a state-of-the-art port with groundbreaking technology.
I sometimes wish I could go back and talk to Charles Rushdie, because I would certainly encourage him to be immensely proud of what he did.
Why minerals deep underground made his wealth soar.
This is it. We've literally struck copper rather than struck gold.
And discover how he was ultimately betrayed by a close friend.
His superintendent of works starts to siphon off about 32,000, so it's equivalent to about 2.9 million now.
There's a fascinating story to this village by the sea.
I'm approaching Charlestown on a tall ship named Annie.
This is the way to arrive.
She's a rigged topsail schooner, the merchant ship of choice in the 18th and 19th centuries. My skipper today is Phil Pryor.
What's it actually like to navigate around these waters?
This is a fantastic coastline to explore. Even when it's rough, it's great, because that's what sailing ships do best, is sail in strong winds. I'm the luckiest man in the world. Look at me, I got this job.
Just see it appearing now on the bow, the village of Charlestown. This village may look familiar because it was used in the BBC adaptation of Poldark, and it's been seen on screen hundreds of times. But the real story of the place is every bit as dramatic as any TV drama you've seen. This place is first mentioned in the 15th century, but it wasn't called Charlestown then. It was called Polmere or Porthmere, which means Great Cove. And even in the 18th century, there was very little here, just a collection of farmsteads and cottages. It was just a little sandy cove.
And back then, the village trade was pilchards.
Just looking at this old building, what we've got here is the remains of a fish cellar. And great wooden beams would have gone in these holes, in these slots, and they would have been used to compress over a period of time, squeeze tighter and tighter those pilchards, extract all the oil and press them for storage. I wonder what's round the other side. So one wall there, and oh yes, we've got the other original wall here. So imagine all the pilchards in barrels in the centre here. When the pilchard shoals were spotted out there, the fishing boats went out, caught pilchards in their millions, and then it was a race against time to get them back here and processed, ready for export. And just imagine the activity, the hubbub that was going on inside this building at the time. And it was scenes like this that greeted one Charles Rashley when he first set eyes on the place.
It's Rashley who would turn this tiny fishing hamlet into one of the most innovative 18th century harbours in Britain. Born in 1747, Rashley grew up at nearby Menabilly Manor. His family were wealthy, but as the seventh son, he would inherit no title or land. Responsible for his own fortune, he seized an opportunity to invest in Cornwall's buoyant tin mining industry. He needed a port to export his tin from.
But there were no deep harbours here. If you wanted to ship goods in and out, you had to beach boats, and you were dependent on the tides, or trailing goods 8 miles away to Foy. He had to do something.
Rashley recognised that if he owned the land here and built his own harbour, he could command the area's valuable tin exports, and the money would start flooding in. He took on the best port engineer in Georgian England, John Smeaton, designer of the Eddystone Lighthouse.
And just looking back, I can see the huge effort that went in to creating this place, hacking into the hillside there to create a basin for the ships. Think what it would take to build something like that today. But in Georgian times, they're not doing it with machinery, they're not doing it with big JCBs, they're doing it all by hand.
The design allowed ships to sail into the outer harbour at high water. This had a large breakwater to offer protection from the dangerous southeasterly winds. They would then enter a sheltered inner dock through 20-foot wooden gates. This was kept at a constant water level so cargo could be loaded and offloaded regardless of the tides. Andy Trudgian's family have lived in Charlestown since the 18th century.
It's quite an awkward angle here. I mean, this is a great breakwater, a great pier, but look, that's a heck of an angle to get a ship into there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, Ben. You can see the mouth of the harbour itself is exposed to this vast bay of St Austell here. So Smeaton designed the harbour for this, with this turn to protect the inner gates.
And now the tide is going out, I can see just how low the water level is in the outer harbour and how high it is behind the dock gates there.
Yeah, you can see the importance of why being able to load at all states of the tide in that inner dock with a nice level of water would have been so important in maximising the usage of the port.
And they're doing it under sail some of the time, but what if the wind's not blowing? What if the wind's in the wrong direction?
Well, they would physically haul the boats in with ropes and manoeuvre them with ropes.
Oh yes, I can see there's two sort of what look like mechanical gears.
Yes,
there.
on the head of both the piers you've got the spindles of the old capstans for manually bringing the boats in and out despite all states of the weather.
Quite a sight.
Yeah, absolutely. He started building the harbour in 1790, and by the end of the decade, what you see around you now is largely going to be what he did.
10 years, that's practically overnight. I think, building a port like this today might take 10 years. It's difficult to imagine the labour and effort and the planning that would have gone into it. It's one thing to construct this harbour, then you've got to operate the port, and that requires, well, huge numbers of people.
Yeah, you could literally walk from one side of this dock to the other without getting your feet wet. Just on the decks of the vessels that were here, you'd have had boat builders, shipwrights, wheelwrights, coopers to build barrels. You'd have had rope makers, a whole host of industries to serve and to keep the port running efficiently.
What do you think Charles would have thought of this as he came down here and surveyed what he'd achieved?
I sometimes wish I could go back and talk to Charles Rashley because I would certainly encourage him to be immensely proud of what he did. I think he took a huge personal risk, a huge financial risk to do what he did here. Everywhere you look, there's a link to Rashley in the past and the importance that this port played in the industrialisation of this part of Cornwall.
It was an amazing feat of engineering, but there was one drawback. Water naturally leaked out of the inner harbour gates when the tide went out, and Rashley needed a constant high water level to load ships even at low tide. He needed a solution that defied nature.
Look at this beautiful lake. This is all made purposefully to assist the operation of the harbour. And they were used to help fill up the dock. They thought initially they would have enough seawater to do that and they could keep that dock wet. But in practice, that didn't work. So they needed more water, fresh water, to top it up. The problem was there was no supply of water in this valley. So they had to bring water from miles away, another valley, to fill up this huge pond, take it down to another pond, and then take that down to the harbour.
In addition to digging out these vast ponds by hand, Rashleigh's men also had to create a leat, a channel to carry the water from its source to the harbour. Starting at the Luxullian Valley, its meandering route is over 7 miles long, at points requiring them to tunnel through solid rock.
Think of the effort that's gone into this. This is a massive work of engineering. And without all of this, the dock wouldn't have functioned. It wouldn't have worked. This is as important as all the engineering works down there, but it's tucked away. It's hidden.
The harbour was complete by 1799, and it was immediately successful for Rashleigh, who was trading a vast amount of tin. And another Cornish mineral was now in high demand, something that was available right on Rashleigh's doorstep. This is what remains of South Polmere copper mine on the outskirts of the village.
We've got a very, very big hole there going vertically into the ground, and this is just a little indicator of what's underneath our feet. There will be galleries going off in all directions. The whole hillside is honeycombed with mine galleries, other abandoned shafts here and there. Incredible to think of, really, and now it's just quiet woodland. And then, obviously,
Dr. Anjana Katwa, an earth scientist, has studied the area's rich resources.
Anjana, I can see traces of people have been digging. There's obviously the mine shaft right there. Why is this area so important for mineral extraction?
300 million years ago, Cornwall was formed by the collision of two continents coming together like that. And what was really rather remarkable at that time was that collision brought up a rock deep underneath the Earth's surface, which was full of metal. Now, over time, those metals would begin to precipitate, mineralise out, and that would form the veins that the miners would discover. So Cornwall is this kind of melting pot, literally, of minerals that are so important for society then and also today.
Now, copper's been tremendously useful for, well, thousands of years. Mix it with tin, you've got bronze.
It was such a versatile metal, and this was the emergence of electricity. Electricity had been discovered by Faraday, and copper was discovered to be this phenomenal element that could conduct electricity. So as the copper was being mined out of the landscape in Cornwall, it was found to be an incredibly useful material to use in this burgeoning industry of electrical engineering.
By the early 19th century, demand for copper was sky high, and Cornwall was the single greatest producer in the world. 10,000 tonnes a year was passing through Rashleigh's port.
It's probably useful to see a sample of this copper ore because it's very different to how you and I imagine it.
I'd be so disappointed if a geologist turned up without some samples of rock.
Absolutely. What would I be? I wouldn't be a geologist if I wasn't holding a piece of rock. That makes me very happy. This is a really dense rock which is full of copper ore. This would have been broken up and crunched up and smelted in order to get that valuable mineral out. You can imagine the miners discovering this with joy and just thinking, this is it, we've literally struck copper rather than struck gold.
They had to work really hard to get it out, sure, but once they got it out, there were fortunes to be made here, serious money.
And Rashleigh didn't just enjoy his returns from the copper boom, he reinvested it. He planned every part of his new village, and it led to more innovation.
Any harbour, in order to be successful, also needs a good land access. And most Cornish fishing villages are approached by narrow, winding roads. But here, Charles Rashleigh was thinking ahead. He created this, the Great Charlestown Road.
Wide enough for 6 carts to be abreast, it still remains one of the widest approaches to any harbour in Cornwall. And it led directly to another important part of his plan, a large hotel to accommodate merchants, sailors and travellers.
Rashleigh would have known that one of the ingredients for a successful trading port was to provide quality accommodation. Very often, inns were not just a place to sleep and get food and drink, but to do business, to cut deals, somewhere to meet. This place was an important part of the success of the port.
200 years have passed and people are still coming here to drink beer, but the building has clearly been extended, adapted and in parts rebuilt. I want to see if there are any original features inside.
I've been pointed in the direction of the cellar, and already I've seen here something that looks part of the original or early construction of the building. These timbers and this lime-based plaster, this stone rubble here, and I can see it's a well-stocked cellar. Whoa, fantastic, lovely barrel vaulted cellar, a big space. And oh, there's a little opening there onto the street. You could get goods in from the street this way as well as coming down the stairs. Sometimes you get cellars that are much earlier than the building on top. The cellars have been left, continuing their function, and the building is rebuilt several times on top of an early cellar. And it's difficult to tell the exact date of this, but it's at least the late 18th century, easily. I'm sure this is all part of Rashleigh's grand design.
As the port developed, Charles also needed to build housing for the workers and their families. The village grew at a rapid pace.
I'm just looking here at cottages. There's quite a variety of styles. Right on the end there's quite an impressive house. You can imagine that might be someone important. These are more humble cottages, the everyday workers, the people that would have enabled the port to operate, and they're overlooking the harbour here. They're right in the thick of it. And we've got something a bit different here. This is a row of houses, a lovely terrace, and there's a uniformity about them, there's a symmetry about them, but they don't look like standard workers' cottages to me. You're housing someone who have got means and are helping the port to operate rather than just your manual labourers. Hi there, I'm talking about your house merrily there, and I saw you sitting down. And I'm sorry, I've interrupted your,
That's all right. Nice to meet you.
Peaceful day.
Hello.
Good to see you. Hi there. What do you know about the history of the house?
Only what people tell you. There's very little written down.
I was just noticing a lot of these houses, I mean, they're all built as a run, and they've all got these alcoves or niches above the front door.
The belief is it was filled in because of window tax, which unfortunately is not true. Because behind that, there's a wall. It's an original wall, and it goes from the front of the house to the back of the house.
So this is all about Georgian symmetry, showing off little features, architectural detail. These are a great reflection of status and the different types of living accommodation you would have had. But also, you're having to bring people in from outside the area. There was no one here. And they're not going to come if there's nowhere to live.
No.
So 200 years on, and it's still being enjoyed as a home.
Very much so, yes.
I'll let you carry on enjoying it.
Terrific. Nice to meet you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
And Rashleigh had already spent a small fortune creating a family home for himself. He'd purchased around 90 acres of land just outside the village and built a palatial mansion with exquisite gardens. It was worthy of aristocracy, and he named it Dewporth Manor. The more Rashleigh built, the more valuable the village became, and he wanted to protect it. So he financed a gun battery complete with a cannon to be built on top of the cliff overlooking the bay.
Now, this was a time when there was threat from the continent, from Holland, from Spain, and the main enemy, France. So in the 1790s, Rashley built this defensive structure. Again, another example of the investment that he's making in this place. And having made the investment, he doesn't want anyone taking it away or raiding it. Rashley's own workforce made up the defence here. If an alarm sounded, they would drop tools, race up here, man the guns and stand ready to defend Rashley's port.
But looking more closely, there's something puzzling.
I can see on parts of the wall it's crenellated. It's got those castellations that a medieval castle would have, and you would think that that was an ideal spot for artillery or riflemen to stand here and pop at anyone trying to attack them from the land. But looking on the inside of the wall, there's no fire step. So actually, you can't get up onto that parapet and fire. And I would expect anything that was a serious defensive structure maybe to have earth ramparts in the front and behind to deflect cannon shot and musket fire. Doesn't have those. It's almost as if it's a bit of a folly. I think Charles Rashley is building a sort of impression of a fort that faces his house over there. It's almost like a defensive structure and garden feature.
The gun battery served as a defence for the village and also strengthened Rashley's status. The villagers must have respected Rashley, even admired him for providing work and good housing. Folklore has it that they secretly commissioned a special breakfast cup and saucer for him from Wedgwood, depicting 5 scenes showing the early development of the village.
It was inscribed with the words to mark the rise and progress of Charles's town. And it's believed from that point on, Polmere became Charlestown.
But not everything was plain sailing in Rashley's port. His good fortune, or good judgment, was about to run out. History guide Lyndon Allen's family have lived in Charlestown since 1791.
I'm looking at this fine old farmhouse, I assume, here.
Yes, this house is Joseph Dingle's house, as a gift from Charles Rashley.
Why? Who was this character?
Joseph Dingle was taken out of the workhouse by Rashley and put to work around Rashley's manor house at Dewporth. But as time progressed, he blended in and he became part of the family.
Charles Rashley is a very capable man, very ambitious man, and he's got big plans for this place, but he can't do it alone. He needs trusted helpers. He needs a right-hand man, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Rashley bestows the greatest trust in him and makes him superintendent of works, building the actual harbour. So from that point, he's top of the tree, but his intentions weren't honourable in the least, and he starts to siphon off different revenue streams. Shipping and tenancies. He collected the rents, he pocketed money out of that, and he got to a point where it was, I think, 32,000, so it's equivalent to about 2.9 million now.
What was Dingle doing with all this money?
I don't think he did anything with it other than live the lifestyle, but I think he gambled away a lot of it. In the end, he was found out, and lengthy court battle ensued, which Rashley won, but the financial implications of everything that had gone on crippled him. There were plans for an outer harbour, which was quite complex, but Rashley had to shelve all the plans. He just couldn't do it, and he was never be the same again.
Still reeling from the court battle, unbelievably, Rashley was duped again, and it was another employee, also called Joseph.
Joseph Daniel was his clerk, and he handled the documentation for the harbour. He was quite switched on, and I think Rashley thought he was good enough to become a magistrate. But in order to do that, you had to have property, and he never had any property. So Rashley said, well, I'll lend you the deeds of Dewporth Manor, my home, on the proviso that when you pass, you hand them back to me. And he reneged on the deal, and he didn't hand it back. So basically, Rashley ended up a tenant in his own home.
So he's lost everything.
He's lost everything.
Just, he can't promote the port, he can't build any more here, but he's actually lost his own home now.
Well, upon his death, the estate, was taken in lieu of debt. So the whole village we see was handed over in lieu of debt. That's how much money that Rashley owned, you know.
Charles Rashley died in 1823, aged 75, in Dewporth Manor, the family home he'd built but had been swindled out of. He wanted his daughter to continue to live there, but instead Daniels sold it. It's now been demolished and turned into a housing estate. But the death of Charles was not the death of Charlestown. His spirit of innovation lived on.
Charlestown was taken over by the Crowder family in lieu of debts owed, and while certain businesses were on the wane, others were on the rise. The China clay industry, for example. China clay was piped from mines inland here to Charleston and then processed and dried in kilns. And that chimney there marks the site of a China clay drying kiln, or dry as they're known here.
China clay was exported to make fine porcelain. Charles didn't live to see this boom, but his legacy of entrepreneurial ingenuity led to further investment in this new industry. And there's evidence of that in the centre of the village, below in what's now a museum.
Exploring this extraordinary tunnel system that was built solely to move the China clay. Up here is a chute. There must have been some form of warehouse that they were storing the clay in. It comes down in these chutes and then it goes on to trolleys or little carts, and you can see the iron rails here on the floor, and off it goes in that direction. I've got some rock here, and then they've consolidated it with concrete here. Concrete's a late 19th century, early 20th century thing, so that dates these sections of tunnel here. And even in the roof here, I can see it's formed. You can see where the boards have actually helped form the concrete. Oh, I can stand up again. And we've emerged here, right on the harbour, overlooking the dock. Well, it seems what's happening is that you could get the trolleys and wagons and the carts here, and then simply tip them, presumably down into chutes, down onto the waiting boats. Very convenient indeed. But why a tunnel? The road traffic here was so busy, the port was so busy, and there was so much China clay coming that they didn't want this traffic to conflict. So by keeping it underground, all the China clay could come here unimpeded, it wouldn't interfere with the traffic on the road above, and they could just ship thousands and thousands of tons, almost unseen by the rest of the port. It's quite incredible, really.
By 1910, Cornwall was producing in the region of 1 million tons of China clay every year. But ultimately, the size of Rashley's port limited the trade when the ships finally outgrew the harbour at the end of the 20th century.
I can't help but wonder what this place would have become had Rashley been able to continue to invest, to continue to build. But he couldn't. His ambition was cut tragically short by misfortune. Nevertheless, the legacy is somewhere that's enjoyed by countless visitors today and seen across the world on screen.